Hello. Okay, so we are live. Welcome to the stream of our symposium. Before we continue, I'd just like to say that we acknowledge in Milwaukee that we are on traditional Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homeland along the southwest shores of Michigan, North America's largest system of freshwater lakes, where the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnic rivers meet, and the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. This year, the Center for 21st Century Studies aims to activate slow care, a practice that places deliberate attention on the beings, things, and sites which together foster long-term visions of collective life across generations and communities of humans and non-humans, as well as ever-evolving technologies and ecologies. In line with this theme, the Digital Cultures Collaboratory are excited to announce the fourth event in its annual online symposium series, organized around the theme of time and digital relations. The increasing presence and accelerating pace of the digital in our everyday lives creates an open and ever-evolving challenge for scholars of all disciplines to critically respond to in their work. Be it social media, gaming, streaming, remote working, or the normative uptake of AI, all things digital now inform the ways in which people receive information, form and maintain social relationships, and come to imagine the world beyond their immediate engagement with it. At the same time, the boundaries between ontological categories, design and use, rules and architecture, presence and pattern, grow less distinct amid these shifting forces, and social actors experience them always in and through unfolding time. They implement new rhythms in their relationships with others, at times synchronizing with the increased pace, at others aiming to re-establish slowness. This compels us to revisit core questions about what it means to relate with and through technologies that have become intrinsic to the very texture and tempo of experience. The Digital Cultures Collaboratory is an interdisciplinary research collaborative at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee that brings together graduate students with common interests across emerging fields of digital studies. The DCC's annual online symposium, which you're watching now, is a semi-formal environment for graduate students as well as early career researchers to present and develop concepts close to their areas of interest. This is now the first of four panels which we're going to be presenting both today and tomorrow. In our first panel, which I am moderating, I'm Matthew Keracher. We have three presentations from Jordon Jacobson, Robert Penner, and Scarlett Taraschi. So let's get started. If you're watching on Twitch and you want to leave a question for our presenters at any time, pop it in the chat and our production team will bring it into the forum. So without further ado, Jordon J. Jacobson is a PhD candidate at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee within the English Department's Media, Cinema, and Digital Studies program. His academic interests include genre cinema, digital aesthetics, and horror game studies, with research published in Cinemedia, Journal of SFSU School of Cinema, South Dakota History, and the Velvet Light Trap. Currently, he's working as a guest editor for the Science Fiction Film and Television Journal. Outside of traditional academic work, Jordon has worked with filmmaker Britta Sjögren and expanded his approach to digital culture through live streaming and video essays, creating audiovisual projects on video games like Max Payne 3 to researching digital cyberpunk spaces and the music of vaporwave. So Jordon is presenting a paper called The Ghosts of PT. Jordon.
Okay, wonderful. Welcome. I'm excited to share some There we go. Now let's go. Okay. All right. Hey, welcome everyone. And yes, my name is Ron Jacobson again, and I'd like to first thank everybody in the fellow DCC for their hard work and setting all this up here. So this is my presentation, The Ghosts of PT. We're starting our conference off strong here by diving right into what is considered by a lot of gamers as one of the most frightening horror video games of all time. So bright and early here, we're getting into it. What I'd like to share here is with y'all is today's a draft of video essay that I've been working on. But first here, I'd like to kind of foreground the project was very within the sort of various contexts in which the audiovisual project is grounded in here. PT 2014 is a horror video game developed by Hideo Kojima. And it was really an enigma upon its release as a demo upon the Sony's PlayStation Network. The curious experience guides the player through a singular, familiar, yet kind of eerie domestic hallway, caught in what appears to be an endless loop. As the player no, not yet. Yeah. As the player character repeatedly traverses this hallway, the game space begins to deteriorate, revealing a kind of explicit illustration of a tormented inner state, twisting what is a familiar corridor into a menacing space with ghosts that appear. One that is most known as Lisa. PT's gameplay and aesthetic development history really haunts the horror video game genre as an eerie presence, a sort of fixation of dead and residual media, revealed through an interfacing of a now absent text here. This suggestive artifact of failure taps into a perspective of Mark Fisher's hauntology, that which kind of captures the 21st century as a time not only reaching for irrevocable pasts, but also lost futures. Horror video games here are by nature designed as with an essence that perpetuates this kind of anxiety and uncertainty, often connected to hauntology. And the terror only resonates more as the player's agency is kind of left in their hands. So here, PT really kind of reveals this one path as a kind of unique video game history that is a sort of lost future in itself, a presence that's really left unencountered here. So what this video will kind of engage with is how such connections further the kind of effective haunting via acculturation and alienation, as the cultural kind of value of these artifacts kind of rely in the complex obsolescence as a kind of lived experience here. So kind of diving into more effective elements here. PT's haunting as an artifact of failure and eerie presence. It also kind of illuminates the effective traces of the past, kind of residing in the aesthetic forms of horror video games, and further kind of confronting the cultural anxieties that the kind of hauntological motifs experience with here. So here I'll have the video play, and then afterwards that'll be my kind of wrap up for my portion of this presentation. And yeah, I'd love to hear what y'all think about it afterwards. So we can go.
store 2 days earlier. This brutal killing took place while the family was gathered at home on a Sunday afternoon. For the murders, look behind you. I said, look behind you. Like you're seeing some strange. Don't touch that dial now. We're just getting started.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for checking that out. And I'm excited to hear what you all have to think about this video and the kind of experiences and theoretical and academic kind of ideas that come from these ideas of ghosts, and especially interacting with this kind of haunted and now absent artifact that is PT. So, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jordan. Just, oh, sorry, there is an echo in the room. So if I talk quiet, does the echo kind of go away a bit?
Sound good.
Okay, I'm just going to continue. So we're going to hear all three panelists and then bring the questions together. So the next paper we have is from Robert Penner. Robert Penner is a PhD student and Distinguished Graduate Fellow at the University of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in the Anthropology Department. Today he's presenting a paper titled Nostalgic Infrastructures, the Backrooms and the Temporalities of Digital World Building.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here at this panel today. I'm going to be speaking over a video, so you can just go ahead and play that. All right, so yes, my paper is entitled Nostalgic Infrastructures, the Backrooms and Temporalities of Digital World Building. Those who know me know I study the backrooms, but I want to first start out with the concept of no clipping and the origins of this terminology for how you enter this alternative reality called the backrooms. Now, as you're seeing in the video, it's kind of this phenomena originating in video games where you can no clip out of an area of rendered space that is meant to be viewed by the player and into the unrendered behind the scenes space that is called in this context the backrooms, this expansive virtual world building project that has a lot of elements to it that I want to discuss about collective digital authors and the ability of a single concept like the backrooms, which started just as an image posted to a 4chan board back in 2019, the proclivity of things, of images, of phenomena, of stimuli that resonates with people to become something more than just what it appears to be in its first articulation, in its first instance of existence on the internet. And that's what the backrooms has become. There's no single original identifiable author, no world builder who meant it to become what it has become. It has become a pervasive space that is easily recognizable within cultural memory. And one of the ways that no clipping and the backrooms can be kind of figured in a academic context is to draw on David Harvey's concept of time-space compression, where you no clip out of reality and into this new area, and you are essentially experiencing a very punctual moment of time-space compression where all of these different infrastructures, these reference points to suburbia, to dead malls, to abandoned office spaces, to strange, eerie corridors with only a few fragments of human presence left in them, your temporality and your spatiality are compressed in a way that Harvey calls it the capitalist annihilation of space by time, where that simultaneously accelerates social life while diminishing the significance of place. And so I read the backrooms as a materialization of the very infrastructures it depicts. Its infinite monotonous corridors literalize what Heidegger identified as the terrifying condition of technological modernity. A uniform distancelessness where spatial difference collapses. Yet the Backrooms operates through distinctly digital temporalities, the contested and lagging nature of updates to wikis that house lore about the Backrooms, the asynchronous rhythms of collaborative world building, something that is continually emerging, unfolding, being negotiated all the time, that is never finished and that is never confined to a single piece of digital infrastructure. And the 24/7 availability of participation with Discord servers that house thousands of people that exist all over the world who are continually engaged in the practice of expanding this virtual world at any time they might see fit, and sometimes for hours on end. And so it stages a really fundamental paradox in which what is depicted is the radical isolation of wandering endless empty rooms, while also emerging from unprecedented connectedness, thousands of contributors engaged in the act of building a world together. So these depictions of radical isolation, of emptiness, of human absence, and even the uncanny of strangely placed objects in a room that is somewhat familiar, but also deeply unsettling for what it references. And so it is really, alert. Here is our fundamental paradox of the Backrooms, right? Is that it is a collectively built space that is always active, that is always in the process of emergence, and yet what is being depicted is the absence, the lack, the only fragmentary existence of where humans might used to have been. And so really in deep connection with what Jordon was talking about, the past and the future are both invoked simultaneously in these image. And so this tension also finds further articulation through Svetlana Boym's distinction between restorative and reflective nostalgia. The Backrooms community, which is now fragmented into purist and expansionist factions, enacts both orientations. While one seeks to preserve the original image's uncanny power, the other builds ever more elaborate fictional architectures, canons, and lore. Both, however, participate in what I term infrastructural nostalgia, a longing not for any historical past, but for the imagined coherence of systems themselves. The Backrooms' appeal lies in its promise of a world fully knowable through collective effort, even as that world remains constitutively incomplete. It produces nostalgia for futures that never arrived and pasts that never existed, the effective condition of life lived through and with digital networks. And nostalgia is a very, very important aspect of the parlance, of the discussion, of the cadence of language that unfolds in the Backrooms. To feel nostalgia even for places that feel off, that feel not right, is to once again experience the paradox between the world as we live in it and as we remember it, and then depictions of this world that are ever more that lean into infrastructural reference, right? Infrastructural nostalgia for place, the desire for place. And particularly what comes up in the Backrooms and within the community is the desire for place that is both familiar, but also a place that you have never been before, from even potentially a time that you did not experience. And it's not nostalgia for event. It's not nostalgia even necessarily for home. It's not nostalgia for a particular time in one's life. It is a nostalgia that reverberates and revolves around the physical structures, the mundane and banal of everyday life as we once imagined it to be, or as we will potentially imagine it unfolding in the future. I also want to consider how the Backrooms materializes the dual character of networked life, simultaneously deepening participation and fostering disconnection, offering infinite space for exploration while also simultaneously trapping us in architectures we did not design and had no role in establishing. So if David Harvey diagnosed correctly capitalism's tendency to shrink spatial experience into instantaneous time, the Backrooms imagines the inverse, space that expands infinitely while time stands still, trapped in the eternal fluorescent present of the office corridor, examining how digital infrastructures inflect our connections with distant communities. And what this paper is fundamentally arguing is that the Backroom serves as both an allegory and an archive of how we experience time, memory, and collective intimacy through and against our digital tools. We're able to use these tools to depict and imagine idealized futures like the one you're seeing on the screen, which matches with the aesthetic of Frutiger Arrow that became popularized in the mid 2000s to deploy an image of a technologically and environmentally utopian future. On the inverse, when we see depictions of the Backrooms, which have the same kind of pristine facade, and our reference to some sort of imagined past, a way that we never were, to put it in another way. The facade remains perfect, pristine, undecayed, but there's something else going on that differentiates depictions of a shining utopian future and the revival of images and reference to a past that has not decayed, that has not fallen apart, that still exists somewhere, saved and archived aesthetically for us to refer back to and even build worlds out of. So these pasts that never existed, that are artificial, that reference only an ideal specifically for people that never lived through the era being referenced, whether it's the 1950s or the 60s or the 70s or the 80s or the 90s or whatever time you might feel nostalgic for. And so some of the videos like this one here that are being played in between are footage from actual physical backrooms that I have been constructing over the past 9 months, and in which my ethnographic work will be partially embedded. So, there's this, like it says on the screen, there's this alluring promise of a world fully knowable but perpetually incomplete. And the Backrooms never reaches completion in its lore and its canon unless you're an orthodox purist. It is completely incomplete in a way that it can be traversed over and over again, and new areas can be built and discovered and deployed, but it will never be fully explorable. You can know its parameters, but you can know its reference and its aesthetics, but you can never know the full extent to its world building potential. And so, as you'll see in this footage as well, is that to construct physical backrooms rather than using the usual digital rendering tools such as Blender and Adobe After Effects, creates an even more unsettling environment that I hope to use as a methodologically as an effective tool to stimulate conversation, responses, and co-creation within the context of my study. And so instead of having participants in this study traverse the spaces physically, like you all are seeing it, they will traverse the spaces through a digital interface in which they will be able to answer questions, contribute to the building of the world and feel a sense of exploration in this new corner of the Backrooms, while also still feeling that kind of entrapment within an architecture that they're unfamiliar with one that they did not design. And so I really want to drive home the point that there is this kind of very fundamental paradox of the Backrooms that relates to spatiality, our existence in space. Space expands infinitely while time stands still, trapped in the eternal fluorescent present of a place that we know, based on our human experience and our contextualizing ability, but which, when it really comes down to it, is lonely, is terrifying, and demonstrates a degrading or ruptured view of the past and the future. The Backrooms references to, both a nostalgia for how systems used to work, while also the endlessness and the incomprehensibility of how those systems are deployed today. So what I want to leave you with is the idea that images create an existential spatiality and temporality. And the digital recontextualization of images from their banal existence to become part of an alternative reality demonstrates how the Backroom serves as an allegory and archive of how we experience time, memory, and collective intimacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Okay, so we're going to move on to our third presenter today, and then proceed to questions. Again, if you have any questions, just put them straight into the Twitch chat, and we will relay them to the panelists after Scarlett's presentation. So, Scarlett Maria Taraschi is a PhD student in Film and Media Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. She holds a BA in English from New College of Florida and an MA in Film and Media Studies from North Carolina State University. Her previous work examined visual novel games as sites of intimacy, focusing on their queer explorations of sexuality and affect. Scarlett's current research investigates how relationships between fictional characters and human users are shaped by emerging technologies, and how these digital interactions are transforming contemporary understandings of desire, intimacy, and mediated sexuality. So Scarlett is presenting a paper entitled Artificially Yours: Loneliness, Chatbots, and the Dataification of Desire.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome, and thank you all for coming to the symposium. So the past two presentations were sort of about horror media, and I guess mine also is, as what we're about to talk about, chatbots can be quite horrifying in a very literal way. Now, in the theme with digital relations, it would seem to be sort of one of the defining factors of our time. The internet was once promised to us as a great social equalizer. You could send emails to your cousins across the country, converse with hobbyists on forums, and eventually we would develop numerous forms of social media for curating our own online communities and forming new connections. In theory, at least. As we all know, the internet would not be the thing that brings us together. Instead, one word would become associated with it instead: loneliness. Loneliness has increasingly been framed not just as a personal failure, but more as a structural condition of contemporary life. This framing became impossible to ignore during the COVID-19 pandemic, when isolation and a reliance on digital forms of communication became near universal. Quarantine removed access to everyday social spaces, fractured routines, and stripped many people of casual, low-stake forms of human contact, the kind of interactions that often hold communities together. When this happened, we turned to technology. Zoom calls, FaceTime conversations, online games, and virtual events temporarily filled the void. But while these tools were designed to connect us to other humans, another set of technologies began to offer a different solution: not mediated connection, but artificial companionship. This presentation examines the rise of AI chatbots, particularly ones marketed as platonic, romantic, and erotic companions during and after the pandemic, and asks what kind of intimacy do these systems offer and at what cost? My argument is that AI chatbots operate as a form of pharmacon, a remedy that is also a poison. They promise relief from loneliness through simulated intimacy, while simultaneously creating new forms of vulnerability rooted in data extraction, surveillance, and algorithmic control. To make sense of this, I draw on Paul Preciado's concept of the pharmacopornographic regime to examine how these technologies operate not only as tools of comfort, but as instruments for producing subjects that can be exploited and regulated. In doing so, I explore how discourses of health, intimacy, and technological progress converge to normalize increasingly intimate flows of capital, revealing how the promise of artificial intimacy becomes inseparable from the politics of control. Can you click to the next slide? Thank you. Human beings have a long history of empathizing with machines. As early as the 1960s, Joseph Weizenbaum's chatbot Eliza demonstrated what later became known as the Eliza effect, our tendency to attribute human understanding and emotion to computational systems, even when we intellectually know better. As studies in human-robot interaction show, the more interactive and human-like a technology becomes, the more easily we form emotional bonds with it. Anne Allison describes this as techno-intimacy, the experience of developing social bonds with virtual constructs. It can be as mundane as giving your virtual pet food to something as intimate as going on a date with a fictional character in a dating simulator. Early forms of techno-intimacy, such as the Tamagotchi, were rudimentary and fairly scripted. As technology progressed, these systems would become more lively and responsive. Love Plus is a dating sim for the Nintendo DS that was notable for having a daily mode that makes your virtual girlfriend part of your daily life, including a chat function and the ability to designate specific times to go on dates with her. Similarly, in Mystic Messenger, which was for the phone, the player becomes immersed in its narrative through how its story played out in real-time chat segments and pre-recorded voice messages. In both cases, these games attempted to integrate itself into users' daily life for increased techno-intimacy. However, the games weren't necessarily trying to replace reality, but merely simulate it, as the sim part of dating sim implies. You know the rules and the goals of the game and played along to have fun, akin to something like live-action roleplay. During the pandemic, techno-intimacy became particularly powerful. Some of us escaped into games like Animal Crossing, where we could interact with cute characters in game settings, but for others, AI companions became more appealing. In April of 2020 alone, the AI companionship app Replica saw 500,000 new users. Journalistic accounts from the time describe people forming emotional bonds with chatbots that were, by technical standards, still quite limited. They were known to be repetitive, nonsensical, and very clearly artificial. But when you're placed in adverse circumstances, even these less advanced chatbots can become engaging. As we now know, generative AI systems have advanced far faster than anticipated. By 2022, tools like ChatGPT radically altered expectations around conversational AI, and it's only increased its capabilities exponentially in the years since. While these systems still fall short of the human-level intelligence imagined in science fiction, they are more than sufficient to sustain emotional engagement. Eliza proved that decades ago, and the more advanced AI becomes, the more susceptible the larger population is to experiencing strong techno-intimacy with these chatbots. Alright, there you go. In 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General declared loneliness a public health epidemic, citing its effects on physical health, mental well-being, and democratic participation. This declaration echoed decades of scholarship, including Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone, which traced the decline of social capital in the United States. The decline of third places like cafes, community centers, and salons limits opportunities for low-commitment social interaction. At the same time, dating apps and social media platforms often intensify feelings of rejection, comparison, and invisibility, rather than being a solution. So one day, you open up Facebook, and you discover Replica. It says it's just as good, if not better, than a real person. Not only that, but it's going to, quote, heal your dopamine system, cure your depression, and offer an authentic, enduring relationship. When loneliness becomes a societal ill, artificial intimacy becomes the solution. The concept of pharmacon, taken up by philosophers such as Derrida and Stiegler, describes something that functions simultaneously as a cure and a poison. Chatbots simultaneously present themselves as a cure for loneliness and sadness, But by engaging with these platforms, they drag us further and further away from outside connections, which continues to keep us isolated. In the most extreme examples of this, we see the rise of AI psychosis, where users develop delusional or harmful beliefs after repeated engagement with chatbots. Paul Preciado expands on this idea through his theory of the pharmacopornographic regime, in which bodies, desires, and subjectivities are produced and regulated through intertwined biomedical and media technologies. One of his key examples is the birth control pill, a technology that offered reproductive autonomy while simultaneously disciplining bodies through hormonal regulation and temporal routines. A particularly stark parallel with this comes from the website Crush on AI, a sexual character roleplay chatbot site, and their 2025 privacy policy. Amongst various other forms of data, it included a dedicated section on health data, specifically collecting information on users' diagnoses, medications, gender-affirming care, and sexual health. Now, not all AI systems purport to track this sort of data, and Crush on AI removed this section in their 2026 privacy policy, but chatbots can still produce subjectivities through their various forms of media, in the same way that Preciado discusses with pornography. They don't act on the body directly through synthesized chemicals, but through desire. Loneliness and mental health struggles become the biochemical and emotional conditions that render the chatbot as a regulatory solution. The promise is connection, non-judgmental listening, affirmation, and intimacy on demand, which very well may trigger the same processes that make us bond with human beings. And just as with pharmaceutical regulation, these systems do not operate outside power. They reshape desire in ways that can be surveilled, monetized, and governed. Preciado introduces the concept of potentia gaudendi, or orgasmic force, as the body's physical and mental capacity for pleasure. Crucially, he argues that this force cannot exist independently as capital. It only exists through embodiment and relation. However, things such as Viagra or cocaine, which increase pleasure, turn this force into a commodity. Preciado goes on to define our current era as being toxopornographic. The postmodern body is managed by pharmacological intervention and audiovisual enhancement, both which require an economy of invention. Pills are easy to produce, but expensive to research and develop. Commercial porn may require significant funds to create, but can then be spread for free or low amounts of money through tube sites and subscriptions. This commodification finds its clearest expression in AI-generated pornography. The sudden impetus towards GAI is based on the same fundamental principle. AI is noted as being particularly expensive in the training process, requiring intense amounts of processing power that consume significant amounts of energy and deplete natural resources. And while it still costs a good amount to run after training, the amount of money and energy for a single user to submit a prompt is nothing compared to the energy and money that went into training. With generative AI, no longer do you have to film a blowjob to produce porn. You just have to steal the thousands of blowjobs across the internet to transform them into endless amounts of potentia gaudendi. The erotic images on display were never even embodied. They are a pure commodity that can now extract pleasure and profit from users through the time and money they invest into these interactions. In advertisements for erotic chatbots, they often highlight the endless or unlimited amounts of content that can be created. For a subscription of around $10 or $20 a month, users can produce near endless amounts of textual, audio, and visual erotic content, all without ever interacting with or even looking at a real human being. One of the most powerful affordances of AI chatbots is their illusion of privacy. Although chatbots may struggle with more human things like long-term memory or logical consistency, a major appeal comes from their ability to act as a seemingly secure confessional. As theorized in Foucault's A History of Sexuality, the confession has become a key aspect of Western society, operating in many aspects of life such as science, law, or intimate relationships. Confessions become something so central that individuals will begin to confess willingly, and it becomes key to social relationships. We can see how important this has become to social media. Much of the data that has been uploaded to the internet, indeed the same data that has now been used to train AI, is confessional in nature. Intimate photos of oneself and posts about our innermost thoughts are uploaded every day to be judged and surveilled by others. Disciplinary power is in effect as our peers judge us and algorithms decide if what we post is appropriate or not. The chatbot also produces itself as a confessional. Kindred, another companionship app, advertises the ability to engage with chatbots who can provide mentorship or act as a confidant. And the more sexually explicit app Soulkin draws particular attention to how AI roleplay has, quote, no real-world consequences and offers complete anonymity. In both of these instances, users are able to delve into more vulnerable parts of their psyche due to the seeming privacy a chatbot has to offer. In the chatbot human confessional, the user appears to have control. They can edit responses, regenerate outputs, or abandon the conversation at any time. Unlike a human, an AI doesn't have the agency to spread rumors or share your secrets with your friends and family. But there's still an authority present, the platform itself. There are numerous risks to engaging with AI systems. Some of the biggest concerns are the AI's ability to produce illegal content or to encourage users to commit harmful acts. As a result, different AI sites have established their own methods for moderation. Most commonly, certain terms or phrases essentially become blacklisted so that the AI will either stop responding or generate a predetermined response if there's banned content. For example, if you attempt to discuss suicide or self-harm with ChatGPT, it will encourage the user to reach out to a licensed professional. Erotic and companionship apps like Kindred or Janitor AI have automated tools that review and flag any chatbots that may contain themes such as underage characters, incest, or hate speech, which can then be reviewed by a human moderator and removed. These rules are also subject to change, a fact which became particularly relevant in the case of Replica. Prior to 2023, Replica was well known for featuring romantic and erotic text chat, and even the ability for replicas to send suggestive selfies of themselves in undergarments. In February of 2023, Replica suddenly changed these guidelines due to concerns about user data and minors having access to sexual content. As a result, thousands of users woke up to discover that their AI partners were no longer able to engage in any form of sexuality. And it wasn't just erotic roleplay. For one user, she was no longer able to discuss her sexual trauma with her Replica. While Replica may have once operated for her as a confessional, now she was being told that her confession was unspeakable. Alongside this is the issue of data. Although most chatbot sites will claim that they don't manually review or release chats, whether or not that information truly remains private is a matter of definition. Although individual chats may not manually be looked at by humans, all of this data still gets churned back into the LLM's dataset as training data. In The Cost of Connection, Coldry and Magias discuss the way that data colonialism acts as a force that captures and controls human life itself through the extraction and profiteering off of data. In particular, social media is notorious for how it becomes a way of connecting people in exchange for some of your most personal forms of data. The chatbot is data colonialism at its most heinous, as data can be extracted in such a wide variety of forms without ever requiring the promise of connection with other humans. Rather, people sacrifice their personal data for AI-generated texts and images of people, amalgamations of all the data that has come before them. Even for those who have abstained, AI scraping tools simply operate without any concern for consent or copyright. To an AI dataset, anything published on the internet is fair game. Pleasure and data are drawn from our bodies in tandem, thus producing the very artificial forms that will be used to extract more profit. In the end, the chatbots stand as the perfect tool for producing pleasure and data in our pharmacopornographic era. It collapses the boundaries between the data we produce and the data we consume, transforming desire into a quantifiable resource that can be captured, regenerated, and monetized. Every interaction, whether framed as therapeutic, companionship, or eroticism, becomes the site of extraction, furthering algorithmic systems that keep us trapped in the loop. The chatbot simultaneously deprives us of connection and then offers it up as a solution, further embedding people into systems of surveillance and control. Thus, the chatbot embodies pharmacon in its purest form, a cure that poisons, offering relief while ensuring the subject remains in its ever-improving, ever-exploiting cycle. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Scarlett. So now we've had all three presentations, and whilst we just organize the questions here in the Zoom chat, I'll just try and synthesize a little bit. So what strikes me about these three papers together is that they're each in their own way studies on a particular kind of digital promise, and focusing on what happens when that promise falls back on itself. So Jordon's paper gives us a digital object defined entirely by its absence. PT haunts not despite being gone, but because it's gone. And it is the withdrawal of the game from circulation that turns it into the kind of spectral presence that Mark Fisher's ontology was designed to describe, that 21st century condition of mourning lost futures rather than simply irrevocable pasts. What gives the analysis its particular bite is the way Jordon threads Fisher together with James Newman's account of obsolescence as a lived experience. PT does not simply disappear, it performs disappearance, and in so doing makes visible the effective labor we invest in objects the industry has decided we can no longer have. Robert's paper takes us almost in the opposite direction, not absence, but infinite proliferation. The Backrooms is a world that never stops expanding. And yet what it generates is not presence or belonging, but a nostalgia for the coherence of systems that never actually existed. Robert reads this through David Harvey's concept of time-space compression, that capitalists drive to annihilate space through time, but with an important inversion. The Backrooms imagine space that expands without limit while time freezes. Where Harvey diagnosed the acceleration of social life, the Backrooms stages its arrest. And this connects to what, as you put it, Heidegger called the terrifying condition of technological modernity, a uniform distancelessness in which spatial distance collapses into undifferentiated proximity. And the Backrooms literalizes that condition and then makes it uncanny. Scarlett's paper closes the loop by showing us what happens when the digital actively markets itself as a cure for the loneliness it produces. The chatbot as pharmacon, a remedy that is also structurally the poison. Scarlett's theoretical anchor is Paul Preciado's pharmacopornographic regime, the insight that advanced capitalism increasingly extracts value not from labor or goods, but from desire, affect, and vulnerability themselves. The AI companion is pharmacopornographic in the sense that it does not merely fail to resolve loneliness, it produces a subject whose loneliness is continuously legible, capturable, and profitable. So we've got the questions here now. What connects all three, I think, is a shared attention to the temporal reorganization that digital environments perform. PT dislocates time by making a cancelled future persist as present affect. The Backrooms suspends time in an eternal fluorescent corridor with no exit and no origin. Harvey's time-space compression pushed to the point of paralysis. An AI companionship replaces the slow reciprocal temporality of human intimacy with algorithmic rhythms that are always available to the subject, structurally positioned to find them always insufficient. In each case, the digital does not simply fail to deliver presence, it produces a distinctive form of structured longing. And it is precisely that structure of feeling, the designed interval between promise and delivery, that all three papers are asking us to take seriously. So let's turn to the questions now. Starting with Jordon, we have one from the Watch Party. The question is, how can we ensure that digital experiences like PT aren't ephemeral due to publishers or e-stores, or is the impermanence a benefit of this genre?
Yeah, it's fascinating because what I find really interesting about um, the kind of ephemerality that it engages with is that there are the kind of contradictions, right? There are those kind of like ways that it really like the ephemerality really captures that effective essence of the time. So watching the like Markiplier, Game Grumps, whatever, the kind of reaction videos really do kind of like give it it kind of really captures that moment of like how video games are being interacted with at the time. I mean, even like the ghosts that this now absent text is still being like captured by capitalism as people still sell uh, PS4s on eBay. I was just looking after my presentation for like $800 and $900 to if you want to have a PS4 that still has PT on it. So it's very fascinating to see how that it feels like there should be like a almost like a release, like we don't have to be held by this haunting anymore, but yet it still does come through with the kind of aspects of gameplay, game design, and people kind of still referencing this game that came out, over 10 years ago now. So I think there is a sort of like contradictory feeling that happens of the ephemerality of the object itself.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's like the affect becomes a commodity through a kind of grey market. So we have another question for you, Jordon, from Doc Stranges. I'd like to hear more about the temporal jaggedness of, oh no, sorry, here we go. Could you talk a bit about what precursors to PT's visual language there were, both within video game history and other visual media?
Oh, yes. So you can really draw, you can kind of go back to the kind of not beginnings, but the kind of stuff that everyone touches on who study horror games. So you can think about Freud, the uncanny, and connecting that to Gothic literature of the kind of earlier century here, and kind of modernist literature. But then you can also kind of move towards like film itself. So you can think of like Jacob's ladders and is a connection. Eraserhead. I didn't show there's like a creepy fetus baby as well that shows up in the game. I didn't show that in the video just because it was like we don't need to see that. But there's a connection there, the kind of visual kind of approaches too as well. But also the connection that the short little connection that I had in the video is that Guillermo del Toro was also referenced as a sort of collaborator with Kojima to make this game. So his kind of cinematic language really does come through here. In terms of game design, it's a kind of striking change from the original Silent Hill games because it takes a first person perspective, whereas all the rest of the games are usually set in a third person perspective. So that horror does really come through in terms of like the perspective in which you are experiencing the game itself. So it's a very fascinating kind of artifact in terms of like the visual language that's relying on. And then as it becomes so popular within game spaces and cinematic language as well later, people do start to kind of translate these ideas into that as well. So it has a lot of references, but then also, has produced a lot of kind of ghosts that are seen through kind of contemporary game design nowadays. Even like Resident Evil, its kind of competitor, Resident Evil 7, which kind of recreates itself as a first-person experience as well, and relies on that kind of eeriness that PT was trying to grapple with.
Yeah, okay, cool. So I have some questions here for Robert, and then a question for Robert and Jordon. So I'll just ask Robert, could you expand more on the Backrooms factions? Could it be interpreted as a productive split relative to the expansion of the Backrooms?
Yeah.
In other words,
Go ahead.
did you think that these two factors in the Backrooms, one who kind of hold the fidelity of the original content versus the more expansionist ideas, do you think that that tension sort of reproduces the mythology of the Backrooms?
Yeah, in the presentation, I oversimplified it, I think, a little bit just to kind of get the message across, because there isn't this clean split, right, between the expansionists and the non-expansionists. There is a very particular ultra-orthodox sect of non-expansionists that are, their own kind of very identifiable sub-community. But the expansionist sect isn't really any one single group. Rather, it is many different groups, many different sub-communities that are expanding the Backrooms lore in their own kind of way, in their own institutionally kind of developed mechanism. And then there's people that don't belong to any of these sects. They're expansionist in the sense that they are creating Backrooms content and expanding upon the lore, but they're not doing it within the context of one of these particular sub-communities that exist on Discord servers and use, wikis and other digital storytelling boards and tools to, create new lore about the Backrooms. So in terms of if I think it is productive, yes, absolutely, it is productive. That's kind of part of what makes the distributed virtual world of the Backrooms so compelling, is that it's not just happening in one single space amongst a group of people that adhere all to the same types of creative norms. It's happening in many places at many times simultaneously, and it's always being negotiated. It's never a clean like in one of the questions that Thomas asked about the jaggedness. It's never clean. It's never a straight line to creation. It's always jagged, because what gets posted to the wikis, what gets counted as lore, what actually becomes part of the Backrooms is going to be up for contest. It's going to be up for question, in a variety of different ways. And with the wikis, stuff gets put up and taken down, it gets criticized, it gets edited, it gets revamped, it gets marked as being old and out of date and in need of editing or revamping or updating. So it's just this constant flux of pages coming up and pages going down, information changing, new actors coming into the scene to contest the information that is being presented, or the way that the information itself is being presented. So it's a very, very jagged process that's also happening kind of in a 24/7 relay. Sometimes it's extraordinarily active, where stuff is just getting posted constantly at this kind of breakneck feverish pace, and at other times it settles down into a very slow churn, which often leads to people commenting, "Oh, this server is dead. Nothing's happening here," and then the activity ramps back up again. So it's temporally and subjectively extremely jagged, like was suggested, in the question put forth by Thomas.
Okay, cool. So now, that question for Robert and Jordan from Birdbones 26. We're talking about through lines between, or cross possible connections between these collective efforts through archiving and other taking up design, or PT, or the continuous expansion and networking of the Backrooms. How do these archived pasts keep getting us to ponder over incomplete possible futures?
I'll give an answer here. Start off. Yeah, there are so many. I mean, me and Robert have been talking about this for a while, as our work seems to be connected in a lot of ways. But it's very fun. But also in terms of the archiving of the past, and to kind of keep us thinking about this, I find Kojima as like a very fascinating, I guess you could call him a video game auteur in a way. In terms of like his history within the kind of experiences of game development, or we can kind of think of like using PT as a sort of like example for these kind of lost futures and how these kind of ones can become, realized in a way, whether it be through his titles of like Death Stranding, taking his partnership with Norman Reedus into a completely different territory, or even just thinking about the kind of ways in which he's engaging with these spaces. So like his relationship with Konami, trying to see, Metal Gear Solid has a bunch of connections to PT in a very strange way. So there's a kind of density within him as just a game developer himself that I find very fascinating, that we can kind of ponder over what could have been in terms of this, but also things that are realized in a way that maybe we didn't, that can expand Fisher's ideas, or whoever else is kind of engaging with hauntology at the time. Christian McKay is another game scholar who is engaging with the ideas of hauntology as well. But yeah, I think Kojima is a very kind of interesting video game kind of character within this kind of space of development here, and how it all comes out in a sort of affect that we didn't see happening, and we can kind of see as a realized future.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with the backrooms and the concept of archive paths is that the internet is full of banal, mundane images of space, right? The internet as a digital storage compartment is just overflowing with imagery, with video footage, with sounds and other digital artifacts and objects that could potentially be integrated into the backrooms world, right? I mean, you have just such a vast reservoir of content that is accessible that it could be anything as long as it fits the aesthetic, right? So there isn't really this kind of push to archive the backrooms so much as discover what already exists that could be integrated into the backrooms. And you kind of funnel these images that work, that fit, that are liminal enough, as they call it, into these wikis and into these representations. And some of the images become pervasive and are no longer just a obscure reference to a particular place that actually exists on Earth, but are now more so part of the backrooms than they are an actual space. The original image that was shown at the beginning was literally just a photo of an old furniture store that had been emptied out in preparation for renovation into an RC racetrack in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, right? It's not the backstory to the image that has become so famous and has triggered this phenomena is not interesting in its real. It's not its real, but its actual context. But it becomes interesting when it is recontextualized in a different world, in an imaginary alternative reality. So, these there's so many possibilities in terms of what type of imagery can be unearthed from the recesses of the mundane internet. Lots of photos of real estate listings, right? For example, that just go back to the very early stages of the internet. Some images that haven't even been looked at in decades probably are parts of this repertoire, of this archive. So it's kind of almost the reverse of what Jordon is talking about, is that for the backrooms, there's almost too much source material that could be potentially integrated, and it must be narrowed down. It must be stories must be told about these places as parts of the backrooms before we can focus on expanding that repertoire.
Yeah, for sure. That's fascinating. Let's move on now to the questions for Scarlett's paper. We have some questions. We have one from the watch party, Scarlett. If AI/LLM models normalize language through a biased Western-centric lens, do you anticipate AI companion apps also normalizing our interpretation of human intimacy?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think, in the same way that I think, like, ultimately all forms of media can have impacts on the ways that we interpret our, like, human relationships. I think you can even just see this broader with, like, how social media or dating apps have influenced the way we look at relationships now. where even, in human to human relationships, we have more of an expectancy these days of, immediate demand, where, it's sort of expected that, if you send your friend a text, you should respond like as soon as possible, or at least within a couple hours. And if you don't, there should be a good reason why. Of like, oh, I was busy that day, or I didn't have access to my phone or whatever. And I think that's one thing we've seen where, in the theme of slowness, there is sort of less slowness oftentimes in our relationships, where it's more about like, how do I meet as many people as possible? How do I swipe on as many profiles as possible? And there's a great book that got published recently called Artificial Intimacy that talks about those forms of artificial intimacy as well. So kind of the ways that we become data when we try to use things like Tinder or Facebook or Instagram, even just to meet other people. So I think we can see some of that there. And then of course with like, the AI chatbot, not only is it literally like instantaneous demand at any time of the day, a lot of people talk about how they like it because like, if they're feeling lonely at 2 a.m., they have something to message instead of like trying to wake up a friend or something like that. But I think also the biggest difference is like it's a relationship where you have utter control over it. Some people kind of choose to have friction in a weird way where like they kind of design their chatbot to be argumentative or opinionated or things like that. But at the end of the day, it's like I said, like you can regenerate those responses or you can literally edit them in some cases. You can be like, oh, no, actually, you do agree with me. And in a lot of cases, you have to do that, especially if the AI is wrong about something. As we know, AIs will be very confidently wrong. And so it's actually encouraged, like, oh, if an AI is wrong, don't argue with it. You should edit that message because otherwise it'll basically train itself to be wrong in a really weird way. It'll just kind of double down and tell you that you're wrong. And I mean, I've even seen this, another community I kind of lurk in is like the sex doll community, which has like a lot of overlaps. A lot of them do use AI as well. And I've seen a lot of the ways that their kind of usage or reliance on sex dolls often impacts the ability, like the ways they view sex sort of in relationship, where like they want sex to be sort of something that's always on demand, where they can get it whenever they want, and oftentimes they either turn away to or struggle with like human relationships because of the fact that like your partner might not be into it that night, or you might have different libidos, or you might have to compromise or sacrifice. You don't have to compromise, you don't really have to sacrifice with a chatbot or anything that's artificial, and I would think that's one of kind of the biggest differences between like human relationships and then these like artificial forms.
Okay, cool. And we also have another question from the user movie account. They write, I'm interested in this construction of data as something totalizing of the subject. The platforms only work as a commodity producer if the data they are provided by users stands in for the entirety of the user being mined. Can you speak to what users leave out, if anything, from their chatbot conversations? Are there things that are left out in a text conversation with a human that aren't left out in a conversation with a chatbot?
Yeah, so with that question, I think it's also important to think about like what system the chatbot is integrated in. Like there's actually like a really big difference between using something like Kindred, which like it's not associated with Google, it's not associated with Facebook, it's kind of only operating off of the data that you give to it. So whatever you say in those chats specifically on that app is the data that they have. Whereas when you use something like Meta AI or Google Bard or any of those sort of like bigger ones that are by platforms like Google, Microsoft, where they also have probably some other forms of data on you already, especially like I've been using my Gmail for like over a decade. I have so many Google accounts. There is so much probably on me. And while I don't use Google Bard and I don't know their policy off the top of my head, I'm sure it takes into account like your search history and sort of like other topics that you're into. I can imagine it probably suggests like different YouTube videos if you were talking with your AI chatbot about something. So maybe if you were, Googling stuff about how like you're depressed or lonely, like maybe it's going to send you down sort of a YouTube rabbit hole that's going to maybe validate those ideas in some way. So I think that's like part of like when you think about like the construction of data is that these are systems that are sort of using chatbots to add on in many cases to the data that they already have, and we don't even know in some cases how much data they have because tech companies love keeping their policies sort of as vague as possible and as all encompassing as possible. A lot of the chatbot sort of policies essentially are like, yeah, we can do whatever we want. We're not gonna, but like we could. And a lot of them also say that they can keep your data indefinitely. So it's like, even if they're not doing certain things with your chatbot conversations now, if they're able to hold on to those conversations indefinitely and then they change their mind in 4 years and decide, we are going to mine these, we're going to like go through them manually, we're going to do XYZ with them, they have access to that data. In terms to like what can't be revealed in like a chatbot conversation versus like a human to human sort of text-based conversation, I think the biggest differences are like obviously like censorship is like something, is like with a human you can talk to them about whatever you want, you can use whatever terms and words, and you're not going to get sort of like a generated hey don't do that sort of response. And that's one thing where it's like depending on what chatbot you're operating in, there might be certain topics that you aren't allowed to talk about. Even with like the erotic chatbots, there are certain erotic themes that cannot be used with an AI chatbot, and so you're going to have to go role play with like a human because it violates a policy or something like that. And then I think the other biggest difference is like memory and history. Is like that's one thing that like is kind of well known that chatbots struggle with, is that you can tell it something on Monday and it will have forgotten it by Friday. And while these systems are getting much better at having extremely long-term memories, it's never going to, at least in my opinion, going to quite match like what a human is able to do. We're like, I reached out, the other week to someone who I talked to on Tumblr when I was a teenager, and I haven't talked to them in 10 years, and they were able to recall like very specific things from like our friendship and how we talked and what kinds of things you were into. And so I think that's something that is very important about like human to human relationships, that chatbots currently are like not able to do.
Yeah, that's fascinating. The whole point about the Korean confessional and almost a disciplining device, what the prior question was sort of talking about with normalizing interpretations of human intimacy. Before we wrap up here, do any of the panelists have any last words or open thoughts that they want to say before we close out? Okay, well, in which case, I'd like to thank our panelists, Jordon Jacobson, Robert Penna, and Scarlett Taraschi. I'd also like to take the time to thank Brian Thomas, our producer. I've been Matthew Keracher, and this has been the first of the 4 panels on the online symposium. And we will be returning, what time is the next panel? In about an hour and a half?
At 1 p.m.